The Whispering Forest. Juan and Andres were inseparable friends. Since childhood, they had shared adventures, pranks, and secrets. Over time, their curiosity for the paranormal became an obsession. They lived in a small town surrounded by a dense forest, shrouded in mystery and fear. The Whispering Forest, as the locals called it, was a place full of unsettling legends. No one dared to enter it, especially at night, when it was said that the trees began to speak. Juan, always a skeptic, laughed at these stories. "Come on, Andres, do you really think a forest can talk?" he asked one afternoon while they had coffee at home. "I don't know. It's weird. My grandmother says that people who enter the forest at night hear voices they shouldn't," Andres replied grimly. "They say you never come back the same." Juan grinned, full of mischief. "Why don't we find out for ourselves tonight?" Andres stared at him, surprised. "Are you serious?" "I don't think that's a good idea." But curiosity soon outweighed fear, and Andres gave in. The plan was simple: they would enter the forest at dusk, explore for a bit, and record themselves to prove that the stories were just myths. Into the forest. That night, the two friends ventured into the forest with flashlights, backpacks, and a small camera to document their adventure. At first, everything seemed normal. The ground crunched under their feet, and the wind whispered through the trees. As they walked deeper into the woods, the darkness grew thicker, and the forest sounds became more eerie. "Do you hear that?" Andres whispered suddenly, stopping in his tracks. Juan switched off his flashlight. At first, he heard nothing unusual, just the wind and the chirping of crickets. But then, in the distance, a faint murmur emerged from the darkness, like someone whispering softly. "Who's there?" Juan shouted, trying to sound brave, though a chill ran down his spine. There was no response, only silence, until the whispering returned, closer this time. It wasn't just one voice but several, overlapping in an unsettling chorus, speaking in a language they couldn't understand. "I don't like this, Juan," Andres whispered, clutching his flashlight with trembling hands. "We should go back." "Go back? We've barely started," Juan said, trying to mask his growing unease. The cabin in the woods. As they continued down the trail, they stumbled upon something unexpected, an old wooden cabin that wasn't marked on any map. The structure looked abandoned, with broken windows and a door hanging from rusted hinges. "Should we go in?" Juan asked with a daring grin. "This is a bad idea," Andres muttered, but he followed anyway. Inside, the air was thick and damp, as if no one had been there for years. The furniture was broken, and yellowed papers littered the floor. On one wall hung an ancient grandfather clock, still ticking, even though the cabin seemed long forgotten. "This is weird," Juan said, shining his flashlight on the clock. Suddenly, Andres's flashlight flickered and began to fail. The lights dimmed, and the air turned colder. Then they heard it again, the whispering, but this time, it came from inside the cabin. "Did you hear that?" Andres gasped, stepping back toward the door. "Shoo!" Juan raised a hand. "It's coming from down there." They found a trapdoor hidden beneath an old rug. Without hesitation, Juan lifted it, revealing a staircase descending into the dark. A foul stench drifted up from below. "I'm not going down there, Juan. This is insane," Andres protested, panicking. "Just for a minute. We'll go down, record a little, and leave," Juan insisted as he descended the first few steps. The descent. As they descended, the whispers grew louder. They weren't just random noises, it was as if someone was speaking directly to them, calling their names. "Juan. Andres. You shouldn't have come," the voices echoed, overlapping like a sinister chant. When they reached the bottom, they found a subterranean room with walls covered in strange symbols, drawn in what looked like dried blood. In the center of the room stood a large mirror, surrounded by extinguished candles. "What is this place?" Andres asked, panic rising in his voice. Juan approached the mirror and shone his flashlight on it. Both friends froze in horror, their reflections were missing. Instead, they saw distorted versions of themselves, older, exhausted, with hollow eyes. "This can't be real," Andres shouted, backing away in terror. Suddenly, the mirror began to tremble, and the candles lit up on their own. A cold wind swept through the room, and the whispers turned into screams. "We have to get out of here, now!" Andres yelled, pulling Juan toward the stairs. The impossible return. They ran up the stairs, hearts pounding, but when they reached the cabin, something was terribly wrong. The cabin looked brand new, as if it had never been abandoned. The walls were clean, and the grandfather clock ticked perfectly, marking midnight. This doesn't make any sense," Andres muttered, glancing around in confusion. They tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. They banged and shouted, but no one could hear them. Suddenly, a soft, female whisper came from behind them. "You shouldn't have come. Now you belong to the forest." They spun around and saw the figure of a pale woman with dark eyes and a wicked smile. She floated above the ground, her feet never touching the floor. "What do you want from us?" One asked, trying to stay calm. "The forest needs new voices," she whispered. "And you will be perfect. The final escape." Desperate, Juan and Andres searched for a way out. They ran to the windows, but each time they tried to break them, the glass repaired itself instantly. Finally, they found a back door leading into the forest. Without hesitation, they bolted into the darkness. But something was wrong, the path never ended. No matter how far they ran, they always ended up back at the cabin, trapped in an endless loop. "This can't be happening. We're stuck," Andres cried, panic overwhelming him. Then, from the distance, they heard their own names again, but it wasn't their voices. It was the voices of their distorted reflections from the mirror. Andres. Juan. It's time. The inevitable fate. Exhausted and hopeless, the two friends realized the truth: they had never escaped the mirror. What they thought was reality was only an illusion. They were trapped in an endless cycle, condemned to wander the forest forever, their voices becoming part of the whispering wind. That night, no one in the town saw Juan or Andres again. Only the wind carried strange whispers through the trees, and if someone listened closely, they could hear the two names, blended with the forest's murmur. Juan. Andres. You shouldn't have come. Chapter 2, The Forgotten Reflection. The disappearance of Juan and Andres shook the entire town. Though no one dared mention the whispering forest, rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed to have seen the two friends near the forest entrance just before they vanished. Others insisted that the whispers in the air now carried two new voices, but no one had the courage to investigate further. A month after the incident, Lucia, Juan's younger sister, returned to the town. Determined and skeptical, she didn't believe in local superstitions. Upon her arrival, she found a heartbroken mother and neighbors unwilling to discuss her brother's fate. What really happened to Juan and Andres? She asked several people, but the response was always the same: silence and averted gazes. It was as if merely mentioning the forest could summon disaster. Frustrated by the lack of answers, Lucia decided to do what nobody else dared: find her brother. She didn't believe in ghost stories or curses. There's nothing in that forest but fear, she told herself, and fear won't stop me. A dangerous decision. Before entering the forest, Lucia sought out old Gregorio, an elderly man who lived near the forest edge. He seemed to know more than he let on. People said he had lived all his life hearing stories about the forest and the people it claimed. They are still there, girl, Gregorio told her with a trembling voice. Your ears may lie, but your eyes won't. The forest twists your senses. What do you mean? Lucia asked, puzzled and impatient. Don't trust the reflections. The mirrors in that forest. They don't show the truth. They show what the forest wants you to see. Lucia frowned, but the old man's warning only fueled her curiosity. That night, she gathered her courage and made her way toward the forest. She was determined to bring Juan back. The first encounter with the whispers. Lucia entered the whispering forest at dusk, just as the sun disappeared behind the treetops. The deeper she went, the heavier the silence became, as if the forest were swallowing all sound. Soon, the whispers began, faint at first, then louder, as if carried by the wind. But Lucia ignored them. "It's just the wind," she muttered. After hours of wandering through the thick woods, she spotted a familiar silhouette, the old cabin her brother had once mentioned. It stood in ruins, with broken windows and a crooked roof. Inside, everything was eerily still. A grandfather clock, although shattered, ticked softly, marking an impossible time, midnight, exactly. Lucia pushed open the door and stepped inside, shivering as a wave of cold air enveloped her. The air smelled stale, and the creaking floorboards warned her that the cabin was unstable. Soon, she found what she was looking for, a trapdoor on the floor, partially hidden under a dusty rug. "This must be it," she whispered to herself, recalling Juan's story about a staircase leading into a strange basement. Without hesitation, Lucia opened the trapdoor and descended into the dark. Reflections of the past. At the bottom of the stairs, Lucia found herself in a small underground room, eerily lit by the flicker of dying candles. In the center stood a large, ornate mirror framed by ancient symbols carved into the walls. Lucia approached the mirror cautiously, expecting to find clues about her brother. But what she saw sent chills down her spine. The mirror did not reflect her as she was. Instead, it showed a distorted, older version of herself, one with lifeless eyes and a twisted expression of despair. Then, without warning, the reflection smiled maliciously and began to move on its own, as if alive. "You shouldn't have come, Lucia," the reflection whispered, its voice a mocking echo. Lucia staggered back, her pulse racing. Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her. Turning around, she gasped in horror. It was Juan. But his face was hollow, and his eyes were sunken and empty. "You shouldn't be here," Juan's voice was a faint, ghostly whisper. "Juan!" Lucia cried, reaching for him. "We need to leave. Now!" But Juan stood still, emotionless, as if something had drained the life from him. "It's too late for me. The forest owns me now. And it will take you too. The forest's game." Lucia's heart pounded in her chest. The forest was playing tricks on her, distorting reality and messing with her mind. But she refused to give up. There had to be a way out. The whispers grew louder, surrounding her. "Lucia. Lucia. Stay with us." Her thoughts became muddled, as if the whispers were weaving their way into her mind. She turned back to the mirror, only to find that Juan and Andres were now reflected beside her, both smiling with an unnatural glee. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut, trapping her. The mirror began to tremble, and a deep, ancient voice echoed from within. "Choose, Lucia. Stay with us, or be lost forever." The walls seemed to close in on her, as if the room were folding in on itself. Lucia realized then that the forest did more than capture bodies, it trapped souls, leaving them to wander as distorted reflections. A desperate escape. Lucia remembered old Gregorio's words, "Don't trust the reflections." Without hesitation, she grabbed a nearby rock and smashed the mirror with all her strength. The glass shattered into countless fragments, and the whispers turned into agonized screams. As the mirror broke, the ground beneath her cracked, revealing a swirling portal of light. With no time to think, Lucia threw herself into it. Between reality and reflection. When Lucia opened her eyes, she found herself back in the forest. The air felt lighter, as if the forest's grip had loosened. Beside her lay Juan, unconscious but alive. "Juan! Wake up!" She shook him desperately. Juan stirred, slowly opening his eyes. He looked confused, but something in his gaze was different, the emptiness was gone. "What happened? How did we escape?" he asked, his voice weak. "It doesn't matter. We're free." Lucia helped him to his feet, and together they hurried away from the forest, never looking back. But as they reached the edge of the woods, Lucia couldn't resist glancing over her shoulder one last time. Among the trees, she saw a flicker of movement, Andres, standing silently, trapped in the reflection of that cursed place. Are they truly free? Back at home, Lucia and Juan tried to leave the nightmare behind. But something wasn't right. Every time Juan passed a mirror, his reflection lagged slightly, as if it moved just a fraction of a second too late. At night, when the house was quiet, Lucia could hear faint whispers, coming from the mirrors. You're not done with us yet. The whispering forest never forgets. And sooner or later, it will come for them again. Chapter 3, The Unexpected Return. For a few days, life seemed peaceful for Lucia and Juan after their escape from the forest, but the relief was only superficial. Something dark had followed them, though they didn't dare say it out loud. The shadows in the mirrors of their house seemed to move on their own, and whispers, barely audible, floated through the night air like a cold breath. Lucia tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, focusing on daily routines, but deep inside, her instincts warned her this was far from over. She knew the truth: the forest never lets anyone leave without a cost. The nightmare returns. One night, Juan woke up with a start, drenched in sweat. In his dream, he had returned to the forest, but this time he was alone. He heard Andres's voice calling out, distant and desperate. Every time Juan tried to follow it, something pushed him deeper into the darkness. Lucia, he whispered, gasping for air as he sat up in bed. It's happening again. Lucia rubbed her eyes groggily and looked at him with concern. Another dream? She asked, though she already feared the answer. It's not just a dream. Andres is still trapped in there, Lucia. The forest is calling me. Lucia knew that Juan had never fully recovered from the trauma of their escape. The strange shadows in the mirrors, the whispers at night, and now these relentless dreams, it all pointed to the same dreadful conclusion: the forest wasn't done with them yet. We're not going back, Juan. Her voice was firm, though her heart wavered. We made it out alive, and I'm not risking everything again. But Juan's expression told her what she feared most: he had already made up his mind. A message from the other side. The following morning, something strange happened. As Lucia prepared breakfast, the radio, which had been off for days, turned on by itself. A haunting, distorted melody filled the room. Beneath the music, a familiar voice whispered faintly. Help me. I'm here, in the mirror. Lucia froze, her heart racing. It was Andres's voice. Juan rushed to the radio, frantically adjusting the dial, but the signal vanished as quickly as it had appeared. You heard it, right? Juan said, his voice trembling with a strange mixture of fear and hope. Andres is alive. Lucia felt a chill run down her spine. They had escaped once, but was it worth the risk to go back? Juan didn't wait for her to respond. He knew what he had to do. Back to the forest. That night, Juan and Lucia returned to the cursed forest, armed only with flashlights and a rope they hoped would prevent them from getting lost. The air felt heavier than before, and the whispers were louder, as if the forest had been waiting for them. Here we go again, Lucia muttered, trying to suppress her growing fear. Andres is out there. We have to find him. Every step they took seemed to pull them deeper into the forest, even though they followed the same path they had used to escape. The shadows stretched longer, and unsettling laughter echoed faintly in the wind. After an hour of walking, they reached the abandoned cabin again. The door, once ajar, now stood firm and unyielding, as if daring them to enter. This is the place, Juan whispered. Without hesitation, they pushed the door open and descended the narrow staircase into the cellar. But what they found there was not what they expected. The mirror had returned to its original, unbroken state. Lucia's hands trembled. This feels like a trap. The second reflection. As they approached the mirror, the beams of their flashlights flickered, and then went out entirely. A suffocating darkness swallowed the room, except for the eerie glow coming from the mirror. Suddenly, the reflection in the mirror changed, but instead of showing Juan and Lucia, Andres appeared, pounding desperately on the other side of the glass. Get me out. Please. Andres's voice was hoarse with fear. Andres! Juan shouted, pressing his hands against the cold surface. Hold on. We'll get you out. But the reflection began to ripple and distort. Andres's face twisted in agony, and from behind him, a dark figure emerged, a grotesque, shadowy creature with glowing eyes that radiated pure malice. Not everyone escapes, the creature whispered, a sinister smile spreading across its distorted face. If he leaves, one of you must stay. A wicked bargain. Juan and Lucia exchanged horrified glances. The forest demanded a trade. If they wanted to free Andres, one of them would have to take his place. We can't leave him in there, Juan whispered, his voice filled with guilt. This is madness, Lucia muttered, panic rising in her chest. There has to be another way. The creature chuckled softly, enjoying their torment. One of you, or all three stay forever, it hissed with a mocking tone. Juan clenched his fists, his mind racing. There was no time to hesitate. If someone has to stay, it will be me. Juan's voice was steady, but his eyes were filled with sadness. Andres doesn't deserve this. Lucia grabbed his arm, her heart breaking. No! We're not leaving anyone behind. The creature in the mirror waited silently, its eyes gleaming with cruel anticipation. Time was running out. An unexpected sacrifice. Before Lucia could stop him, Juan made a desperate decision. He slammed his fists against the mirror, shattering it with a deafening crack. A furious wind whipped through the room, scattering shards of glass like deadly confetti. No! Juan, don't! Lucia screamed, but it was too late. Juan reached through the jagged opening, grabbing Andres's hand. A blinding flash of light erupted from the mirror, enveloping the entire room. When the light faded, Andres was free. But Juan was gone. The mirror had taken him instead. A fate worse than death. Lucia collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by the weight of what had just happened. Andres, still dazed, pulled her to her feet. We have to go. Now. They stumbled out of the cabin, running as fast as they could while the forest screamed in fury. The creature's wails echoed through the trees, furious that it had been denied its full prize. They reached the edge of the forest just as the first rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon. Andres took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air for the first time in what felt like an eternity. And what about Juan? Andres asked, his voice heavy with guilt. Lucia, tears streaming down her face, looked down at a small puddle of water on the ground. In its surface, Juan's reflection stared back at them, trapped forever on the other side. He'll never truly be free, Lucia whispered. The forest always claims its price. And though they had escaped once more, the shadows in the mirrors would remind them every day that Juan was still waiting, trapped in a place where no one could follow.